So I wanted to make this video to show how I make my own hypochlorous acid solution. And just to be clear before we get started, I am not an eye doctor or any kind of doctor. I am just sharing what I use, how I found it, and why I started making it myself. If you want to skip ahead to the process or jump around, I'll try to include timestamps. I don't normally make YouTube videos, but I'll do my best to make that easy to navigate. Please be smart about it and check with your doctor or provider before trying anything. This is just my personal routine. I started using hypochlorous acid for ophthalmic purposes after talking to one of my doctors. I take 2 different biologics for a condition that affects my nerves, including the corneal nerves in my eyes. One of those treatments is autologous serum, which is pretty common in chronic eye conditions. The other one is a lot lesser known and lesser available. But what they have in common is that they leave a buildup around my eyelashes and the skin around my eyelids, especially the autologous serum at higher concentrations. And I use both of them 4 times a day. If you know, you know, and it starts to feel like gross by the end of the day. Sometimes I just want to clean that off quickly before I leave the house, or when it starts to just feel like too much. So I asked my doctor what she would recommend since I have sensitive skin, and trying to clean it off with just water or other products wasn't really working. So it wasn't always easy unless I was just about to go in the shower. She recommended Avenova, which is a medical grade hypochlorous acid spray. And just to be clear, what I'll be showing here is not medical grade. It is a DIY solution. That said, I do still like Avenova. It works really well, and I still use it from time to time, which I'll talk about a little bit later, I'm sure. But my only issue with it is the cost. It's really expensive, especially if you're using it regularly. I use it typically at least once a day, sometimes twice a day. Even with, I was getting the 3-packs on Amazon Subscribe and Save, and it was still super expensive. So before I started making my own, I looked for other brands on Amazon to see if anything compared in terms of quality at a cheaper price. But if you know anything about Avenova, you may know that the reason it's recommended by so many doctors is because it is a really high quality hypochlorous acid. There are published studies about it validating its quality. There's a reason people like it and that it's recommended. My spouse has a chemistry background, and that helped give me more confidence to do some of these things myself and create this process. But even before we got there, we ended up buying a couple different brands on Amazon and some test strips and started comparing them to Avenova. And at least in our at-home trials, the cheaper sprays really weren't comparable to Avenova. Consistently, the cheaper hypochlorous acids that we got, even some of the other known name brand ones, the potency wasn't the same. If you know anything about hypochlorous acid, you may know that it degrades really fast. It converts into saline. And a lot of the sprays that we tested were actually straight saline or really close to it by the time they got delivered to our house. But Avenova was consistently maintaining its potency and its quality. So while you can buy cheaper sprays, they just may not compare, and that just wasn't worth it to me at that point to downgrade. So, but at the same time, I couldn't really justify the long-term cost of Avenova either. So I floated the idea, could I just make my own? And my husband said it's possible, but I would need a hydrolyzer. So, and just a heads up, I may pronounce some things wrong along the way here. This is not my area of expertise. And there are also probably cheaper ways to make hypochlorous acid than the method that I use, but this is what works for me. I make it about every 2 weeks, and this has been the quickest, easiest, and most affordable method that fits into my life. There's some upfront costs and a little bit of maintenance, but compared to what I was doing before, this is simple, manageable, and it takes very little time. What made me decide to make this video is that I mentioned this to one of my doctors that I was making it myself because I've been doing this for quite a while now. And she told me that she has a lot of patients who could benefit from a cheaper long-term option. When I heard that, I realized that this wasn't really a niche thing, that there's a lot of people that use it for a lot of different conditions. And if you just type it in on YouTube, you'll find doctors talking about its various uses and all about it. And so that's what motivated me to share this. So some recommended supplies for this. The hydrolyzer that I use personally, and again, this is not a sponsor of any kind, but I use Force of Nature hydrolyzer. There are other ones available that I'm sure would give similar equal results. And I think you can possibly even DIY that too, but that's just one that I use. I use distilled water for this. Anything that goes near my eyes, I just prefer distilled because my eyes are sensitive, at least my nerves are sensitive. So I like distilled water, not necessarily, it doesn't have to be from Target, it could be from anywhere. I use a funnel to help get it in there because I don't have very good aim. And then I usually like to have some kind of a small bowl nearby. The bottle, so I like to just reuse the bottles from Avanova. So like I said before, I do still buy Avanova, but I buy it specifically to use their bottles. Like I'll use the product up, and then once the bottles are empty, I reuse these like 10 times. Eventually, I don't like to reuse them anymore because I don't think you should use them forever. But I like the fact that their bottles are amber because hypochlorous acid degrades more when it's exposed to light. So the fact that their bottles are dark helps preserve it. And I also trust that their bottles are nice and clean. You can buy amber bottles pretty much anywhere, but anywhere that I found had amber bottles, they weren't always like medical or pharmaceutical grade. And even if you could find them, I bet they'd be pricey anyway. So I was like, I'm just going to keep rebuying it. But then, I mean, I'm reducing the frequency at which I buy it significantly. So it's so much cheaper. So I do still buy Avanova specifically for their bottles. So again, use the product up and then just reuse the bottles into the ground for this. That's what I do anyway. I have these chlorine test strips from Amazon. I have these simple pH test strips from Amazon also, and just a cheap Lure syringe from Amazon. I have a 5 ml syringe that works well for me. And I can kind of show you the end of what that looks like. Perfect. Okay, so I'm gonna start off by just filling the hydrolyzer, and it takes, I think, like 10 minutes or so to run. Now, I'm not a very good pourer. This particular hydrolyzer has a line on the back of it that tells you when you've done a good job. So once I have my water in there, I take one of these, so Force of Nature makes these like I don't even know what you would call this, like vials. And this is kind of your ongoing cost with this, is you have to buy these, but they're not super expensive. They go on sale periodically. I just buy them through their website. And I've not bought any since I first bought these, so they do last quite a while. I think you could even make your own if you were not lazy like me, because don't quote me on this. I think this can be, I'm not going to say the ingredients because I don't actually know what I'm talking about, but I think it's pretty simple ingredients actually is what's in here. But yeah, so I just twist this guy off. And then I just pour it in. And they say to wait like maybe 10-ish or so seconds for it to kind of settle its way through to the bottom. And then once you've done that, you just turn it on. And now we wait. And we're done. So I want to be clear that what I made is not what I use. Force of Nature is a brand that makes a multi-purpose cleaner for like households. This hypochlorous acid is great for that, but it should not be used like, yeah, for other things in that, because it's like a really high concentration. So I have to dilute this down. How I did it, like now I have a system and I know exactly like what I need to do to get to the appropriate concentration, because I know what my hydrolyzer does every single time. It's very consistent. I always double check it every single time, but I, for the most part, know whereabouts it's going to land. When I did it the first time, I knew what Avenova ran for a, like parts per million of chlorine. So I knew it ran about 100 parts per million, and that's where I was aiming. So it was a little bit of math and then some guess and check to see like how many cc's of hypochlorous acid I needed and how many cc's of distilled water I needed. So I wanted to jump in here and provide some clarification on how I gave myself those rough estimates and measurements for the hypochlorous acid and water to hit my target parts per million. I had to look back because I couldn't quite remember how I did it. And honestly, I don't think it's going to be super helpful, but I'll explain it. I started by looking up what Force of Nature typically runs in terms of parts per million, and then did some math to figure out how much I'd need to dilute it to achieve 100 parts per million concentration. From what I found, Force of Nature runs around 220 parts per million on average at the time of this recording. Most sources will tell you, if you look it up, that Force of Nature is about 220 parts per million. So I was aiming for 100 parts per million. You can see that it's not quite a 50-50 mix, but it's close. I remember mapping it out to something like, when I did the math, it was like 13 point something cc's of hypochlorous acid and 16 point something cc's of water, or mLs, whatever you prefer. But when I actually mixed it, the chlorine strips showed I wasn't really all that close to the parts per million that I needed. And I was super confused. I was like, is my math wrong? What is going on here? And what we figured out was probably going on. My chlorine test strips from Amazon only go up to like 250 parts per million. So I couldn't get an accurate measurement to really correct my math. It ended up being way more guess and check than actual math. But what we think was happening is that and there's a name for it. The name is escaping me right now. There's a technical term for it. But the fresh hypochlorous acid, when it's just been hydrolyzed, has a higher concentration right after the electrolysis, but it degrades rapidly. And even the bottle that Force of Nature gives you is a clear bottle, so it's going to degrade pretty quickly, probably down to that 220 parts per million. And I don't know how long after it's made that the company measured it to get that figure, but that light exposure is going to degrade it even quicker. But the measurements I go over in the video work for me. They work for my hydrolyzer. I store mine in an amber bottle, the one that I use on myself, not the cleaning one. But I've tested it throughout the 2-week period and it holds consistently. Obviously, every device, every brand could run a little bit differently, so that's important to keep in mind. So I want to prepare to mix up what I use. So I actually need very little hypochlorous acid from there. Honestly, it's a pretty strong solution, so it's mostly water. So what I like to do is just pour a little bit of water into a clean dish. And again, this is not a sterile procedure. Avanova probably is, but mine isn't. So I know that I need 17 mLs of water and 5.4 mLs of hypochlorous acid. You could use bigger syringe or more than one. I just wanted the easiest, cheapest way, so I just have a 5 ml syringe, but 17 mLs of the water. And I'm not like super precise when I do this. Obviously I don't want to be way off, but I'm not drawing up a medication or anything. And there is 17. And then when I do the hypochlor, I just like to kind of tilt this a little bit because I don't need much. And again, these numbers are just what my unit consistently like works with. This is what I found out makes the perfect concentration for mine. So that's 5. Just a tiny bit more. A little hard to see. So as you can see, I mean, it really does not take very much of that, all things considered. And then I am going to, and I'm sorry, I'm not very good at this camera work here. I just kind of give this a good stir, and then I put my lid back on, and then I just kind of do like some shakes and rotations. And then when I feel like it's relatively mixed up, and this is full, like dang near to the top, I always double check with my test strips to make sure everything is okay, to make sure that the hydrolyzer has not gone rogue today. So the first thing I check is pH, because that's really important for what I'm doing. Which is like eye things. So I make sure that we've got a good pH, and we do. And the other thing that I check is the chlorine, to make sure that the hydrolyzer didn't screw up, and to make sure that I didn't screw up my concentration. So I'm aiming for somewhere around 100 parts per million. I have seen brands go up to 2, and it's really hard to see on here. On the camera, it probably looks closer to 2, but in real life, I swear it is closer to 100. Okay. And that is my bottle for the week. So then the question is, what do I do with the rest? Because I have a ton of hypochlorous acid. The brand that I bought also comes with a spray bottle that you can use as household cleaner for the, not for the week, for 2 weeks. It lasts for 2 weeks, which I'll also explain. So I just pour this guy in. Because again, this is a very high concentration. I don't even remember what it is. And that is my household cleaner. And it works really well too. So then this, I'm actually gonna move it, so I'll have to end up unplugging it, but this lights up green when it's good. And then as it starts to degrade, because one thing I don't like actually is that it comes in a clear bottle. Because as I said before, the light degrades it quicker, but it degrades and converts over to saline over time and with light exposure. So this with time will start to go from like green to, I think eventually it hits like yellow, and then when it's red, your solution is bad and you need to get rid of it and make a new one. So that kind of helps you keep time and track of it. So that's kind of nice, but so it's not all bad. I mean, I don't really buy household like sprays or anything anymore, so it's kind of two bird, one stone, which is kind of nice. So yeah, that is how I make my own hypochlorous acid.